The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Kandahar as Navy SEAL Team 7 moved through the narrow alleyways with practiced silence. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his grip on his rifle, sweat already beading beneath his helmet despite the early hour. The intelligence had been solid. A high-value target was holed up in the compound 3 blocks ahead, and their mission was to extract him alive. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Sarah Chun moved with the team, her medical bag secured tightly to her back. At 26, she had already seen more combat than most soldiers twice her age. Her parents back in San Francisco still thought she worked at a peaceful military hospital, processing paperwork and taking temperatures. They had no idea their quiet daughter spent her days running through hostile territory, keeping America's most elite warriors alive. The team consisted of 8 members, each handpicked for their expertise. Rodriguez led from the front, his experience in 3 previous deployments evident in every calculated step. Behind him, Petty Officer Jake Sullivan scanned rooftops through his scope, while Petty Officer Tim Walsh monitored their communications. Chief Petty Officer David Kumar brought up the rear, his eyes constantly moving, watching for threats from behind. Sarah had earned her place among these men through blood, sweat, and an unwavering dedication to her oath as a medic. She remembered her first mission 18 months ago, how her hands had shaken as she treated a wounded SEAL under enemy fire. Now those same hands moved with steady precision, and the team trusted her completely. They called her Doc with the same respect they reserved for their weapons and each other. The compound appeared ahead, a 2-story concrete structure with high walls and a single gate. Intelligence suggested 3 to 5 enemy combatants inside, along with their target, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces. The plan was simple: fast entry, secure the target, extract any intelligence, and get out before reinforcement could arrive. Rodriguez held up a closed fist, and the team froze. Through his earpiece, he heard the drone operator's voice. "Overwatch, this is Eye in the Sky. I'm seeing movement on the roof. 2 tangos with AK-47s. 3rd floor window shows possible sniper position." Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly, but her breathing remained controlled. She mentally reviewed her medical supplies and the layout of the compound they had studied during briefing. If someone got hurt, she needed to know exactly where to move them for the fastest evacuation route. The entry went smoothly at first. Sullivan and Walsh breached the front gate while Kumar and Rodriguez moved to the back entrance. The first 2 floors cleared quickly, too quickly. Sarah felt the familiar knot in her stomach that came when things seemed too easy. Her instincts, honed by countless missions, told her something was wrong. They found their target in a 3rd-floor room, but he wasn't alone. 3 women sat huddled in the corner, their faces covered, their hands bound. The Taliban commander raised his hands in surrender, a cruel smile playing across his lips. He spoke rapidly in Pashto, gesturing toward the women. Walsh, who spoke some of the local language, translated grimly. "He says they're suicide bombers. Says if we move them, they'll detonate." Rodriguez studied the situation carefully. The women appeared terrified, but that could be an act. In this war, nothing was ever certain. Children had been used as weapons. Mothers had hidden explosive beneath their traditional clothing, and trust was a luxury that could get you killed. "Doc, stay back," Rodriguez ordered. "We need EOD up here to check for explosives." But as Sarah watched the women, something felt different. Their fears seemed genuine, raw. One of them, barely more than a girl, was shaking so violently that Sarah could see it even from across the room. Another appeared to be injured, dark stains visible on her clothing. The Taliban commander continued talking, his smile growing wider with each word. Walsh's translation grew more disturbing. He says the women are American spies. Says they've been captured and tortured. He wants to trade them for safe passage. Sarah's medical training kicked in. Injured people needed help, regardless of nationality or circumstances. She started to move forward, but Rodriguez grabbed her arm. "Doc, we don't know what we're dealing with here. Protocol says we wait for EOD." But Sarah was studying the women more carefully now. The injured one had lifted her head slightly, and Sarah caught a glimpse of her eyes. There was something familiar there, something that made Sarah's blood run cold. Those weren't the eyes of a local woman. They were blue, a striking blue that reminded Sarah of someone she knew. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Lieutenant Jennifer Morrison, a Navy intelligence officer who had gone missing 3 weeks ago during a reconnaissance mission. The military had been searching for her ever since, following every lead, checking every safe house. And here she was brutalized and bound in the hands of the man they had come to capture. Sarah's mind raced. Morrison was a decorated officer, fluent in 3 languages, trained in survival and resistance techniques. If the Taliban had broken her, if they had forced her to become a weapon against her own people, it would be a propaganda victory beyond imagination. But something in Morrison's eyes told Sarah that the fight wasn't out of her yet. The other 2 women remained mysteries. Their faces were still covered, their identities unknown. But if Morrison was here, if she had been captured and held in this place, then the mission had just become something entirely different. This wasn't just about capturing a Taliban commander anymore. This was about saving American lives and protecting national security. Rodriguez was calling for backup, requesting EOD and additional personnel. But Sarah knew that every minute they waited increased the risk. The Taliban commander's confidence suggested he had a backup plan, and the longer they remained in the compound, the more likely it became that reinforcements would arrive. Sarah made a decision that would haunt her for years to come. She pretended to adjust her medical equipment while secretly studying Morrison's position. The lieutenant was clearly injured, possibly severely, but she was conscious and aware. If Sarah could get close enough to assess her condition, maybe she could determine whether the explosive threat was real or just another layer of deception. The compound had grown eerily quiet. Outside, she could hear the distant sounds of the city waking up. Vendors calling out their wares, children playing in the streets, the normal sounds of life continuing despite the war raging around them. Inside the room, tension thick enough to cut dominated the space. Rodriguez was growing impatient. The mission timeline called for extraction within 30 minutes of entry, and they were already pushing that limit. Every second they remained in the compound increased their exposure to counterattack. But the presence of potential American prisoners changed everything. Sarah caught Morrison's eye and held it. Without speaking, she tried to communicate her recognition, her determination to help. Morrison's response was subtle but clear, a slight nod, barely perceptible, but enough to confirm what Sarah had suspected. These weren't suicide bombers. They were prisoners, and at least one of them was American military personnel. The Taliban commander seemed to sense the shift in the room's dynamics. His smile faded, and he began speaking more rapidly, more urgently. Walsh struggled to keep up with the translation, but the message was clear. Time was running out. Sarah looked at her teammates, these men who had become her brothers through shared danger and mutual trust. They were all looking to Rodriguez for guidance, waiting for orders that would determine not just their fate, but the fate of the women in the corner. The weight of command was visible on Rodriguez's shoulders as he weighed options that all carried terrible risks. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the compound. Somewhere outside, other coalition forces were engaged with enemy fighters. Whether it was related to their mission or just another skirmish in an endless war, Sarah couldn't tell. But it served as a stark reminder that they were operating in hostile territory, surrounded by people who wanted them dead. Sarah's medical bag felt heavier than usual. Inside were the tools to save lives, but only if she could reach the people who needed saving. Morrison was clearly in pain, possibly bleeding internally from her injuries. The other women might be injured as well, but their concealing clothing made assessment impossible from a distance. Rodriguez made his decision. "Doc, I need you to stay with Kumar and maintain Overwatch. Sullivan and Walsh were going to secure the commander and get some answers. If those women are rigged with explosives, we need to know before we can help them. As the team moved into position, Sarah felt a familiar mixture of fear and determination. In a few minutes, everything could change. Lives would be saved or lost based on the decisions made in this room, in this moment. She thought briefly of her parents, safely asleep in their San Francisco home, unaware that their daughter was about to face one of the most challenging situations of her military career. The Taliban commander's eyes darted between the SEAL team members, calculating odds, looking for weakness or opportunity. Sarah realized that despite being outnumbered and outgunned, he still believed he held the advantage. That confidence meant he was hiding something that could turn the tide in his favor. Morrison shifted slightly, and Sarah saw fresh blood seep through her clothing. Whatever injuries she had sustained, they were serious and getting worse. If they were going to save her, they needed to act soon. But first, they needed to determine whether helping her would result in an explosion that would kill them all. The next few minutes would determine everything. Sarah checked her medical supplies one more time and prepared for whatever was coming next. Rodriguez approached the Taliban commander with the calculated movements of a predator. His weapon remained trained on the man's center mass, while Walsh positioned himself to cover the women in the corner. The intelligence officer who had been missing for 3 weeks was clearly Lieutenant Morrison, but her condition was deteriorating rapidly. Sarah watched from her position near the doorway as Rodriguez began his interrogation. The SEAL team leader's Pashto was limited, but his tone was unmistakable. He wanted answers, and he wanted them immediately. The Taliban commander's responses came in rapid bursts, punctuated by gestures toward the 3 bound women. He's saying the women are wired. Walsh translated, his voice tight with concentration. Claims there's a dead man's switch. If anything happens to him, they detonate. Kumar cursed under his breath from his position at the window. Yodi is 10 minutes out minimum. We don't have 10 minutes. Sarah's medical training was screaming at her to help Morrison, who was clearly losing blood at an alarming rate. The dark stains on the lieutenant's clothing had spread significantly in just the few minutes they had been in the room. If she didn't receive medical attention soon, the question of explosives would become irrelevant. She would bleed to death. Rodriguez made a decision that would define the rest of the mission. Doc, I need you to assess the situation. Stay low, move slowly, but I need to know what we're really dealing with here. Sarah's heart pounded as she began moving across the room toward the 3 women. Every step felt like it might be her last, but her oath as a medic compelled her forward. As she got closer, she could see that Morrison was conscious but struggling to stay alert. The other 2 women remained motionless, their faces still covered. The Taliban commander's voice rose in pitch as Sarah approached. Walsh's translation became more urgent. He says not to touch them. Says the American woman is already dead, that helping her will kill us all. But Sarah could see that Morrison was very much alive. The lieutenant's eyes tracked Sarah's movement, and she mouthed the single word that made Sarah's blood freeze: help. Sarah knelt beside Morrison, ignoring the Taliban commander's increasingly frantic protests. Up close, the extent of the lieutenant's injuries became clear. She had been severely beaten, with obvious signs of torture, including burn marks and deep cuts. But more importantly, Sarah could see no evidence of explosives attached to her body. She's clean, Sarah called out to Rodriguez. No visible wires or devices. Morrison tried to speak, but only managed a whisper. Sarah leaned closer to hear. Oh, they're not American. Sarah's hands moved quickly, assessing Morrison's wounds while trying to process this new information. If the other 2 women weren't American, who were they? Local civilians caught in the crossfire? Taliban sympathizers forced to play their part in whatever deception was unfolding? The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air outside. Extraction was coming, but whether it was friendly forces or enemy reinforcements remained to be seen. Rodriguez made urgent hand signals to his team, positioning them to cover all possible entry points to the room. Sarah began treating Morrison's most serious wounds, starting with the sources of the heaviest bleeding. The lieutenant had taken a beating that would have killed most people, but her military training and sheer determination had kept her alive. As Sarah worked, Morrison whispered fragmented pieces of intelligence. 3 weeks they wanted codes. I didn't break. Rodriguez moved closer to hear Morrison's report while keeping his weapon trained on the Taliban commander. Doc, can she be moved? Sarah assessed quickly. Morrison had lost a significant amount of blood and probably had internal injuries, but she was stable enough for a short-term evacuation. She needs immediate surgery, but she can travel. The Taliban commander seemed to realize that his leverage was slipping away. He began speaking rapidly, desperately, his earlier confidence replaced by growing panic. Walsh struggled to keep up with the translation, but the key points came through clearly. More fighters were coming, the compound was surrounded, and the Americans had walked into a trap. Kumar's voice crackled through the radio from his position at the window. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north. Armed fighters dismounting. We've got maybe 2 minutes before this place becomes a war zone. Sarah looked at the other 2 women, still bound and motionless in the corner. She had to make a choice. Focus entirely on saving Morrison, or risk everyone's lives trying to help people who might be complicit in the ambush. Morrison seemed to read her thoughts and whispered urgently, Afghan interpreters, they helped us. The revelation changed everything. These weren't enemy combatants or unwilling participants in a deception. They were Afghan women who had risked their lives helping American forces, and now they were being used as human shields by the same people who wanted to kill them all. Rodriguez's tactical mind processed the new information quickly. Doc, how long to stabilize all 3 for transport? Sarah looked at the 2 Afghan women. Without being able to examine them properly, she couldn't assess their injuries or conditions. But if they had been prisoners alongside Morrison for any length of time, they had probably suffered similar treatment. Give me 3 minutes to check them, Sarah said, already moving toward the second woman. The Taliban commander lunged forward as if to stop her, but Walsh was ready. The SEAL's rifle but connected with the man's solar plexus, doubling him over and ending his protest for the moment. Sarah pulled back the covering from the second woman's face and immediately understood why Morrison had called her an interpreter. The woman was young, perhaps 20, with the educated look of someone who had worked closely with coalition forces. Her eyes showed intelligence and terror in equal measure. Like Morrison, she showed signs of severe abuse, but she was conscious and alert. When Sarah spoke to her in English, she responded immediately. Please, they kill my family. I only wanted to help. The third woman was in worse condition. Older, perhaps in her 40s, she appeared unconscious and was breathing raggedly. Sarah's quick examination revealed serious injuries, including what felt like broken ribs and possible internal bleeding. This woman would be the most challenging to move. The sound of gunfire erupted outside the compound. Kumar reported through his radio, "Contact front." Multiple insurgents moving toward the main entrance. They're setting up for a coordinated assault. Rodriguez made the call that would define the mission's outcome. We take all 3. Doc, stabilize who you can in 60 seconds, then we move. Sullivan, prep the north window for fast rope extraction. Sarah's medical training took over completely. She moved between the 3 women with practiced efficiency, applying pressure bandages, starting 4 fluids for Morrison, and administering pain medication where needed. The young interpreter was in the best condition to move, while the older woman would need to be carried. The Taliban commander had recovered enough to resume his threats, but his words carried less weight now. Rodriguez zip-tied his hands and prepared him for transport as well. The intelligence value of a live high-value target was too significant to abandon, even under these circumstances. Morrison gripped Sarah's arm with surprising strength. "Sergeant, Rodriguez," she whispered. "There's something else they have. American weapons stolen from convoy last month." Rodriguez leaned closer to hear Morrison's intel. A stolen weapons convoy had been a significant concern for Coalition Command, with fears that advanced American weaponry had fallen into enemy hands. If Morrison had intelligence about the location of those weapons, it could prevent them from being used against other American forces. Where? Rodriguez asked urgently. Morrison's voice was fading, but she managed to point toward a corner of the room where Sarah hadn't looked closely before. Behind a pile of blankets and personal belongings, the outline of American military equipment was visible. M4 rifles, ammunition, and what appeared to be advanced communication gear. The discovery complicated their extraction significantly. They couldn't leave American weapons behind for the enemy to use, but carrying additional equipment while evacuating wounded prisoners would slow their escape considerably. Kumar's voice came through their radios with increasing urgency. They're breaching the outer perimeter. We need to move now. Sarah had done everything she could for the 3 women in the time available. Morrison was stable enough to move with assistance. The young interpreter could walk with support, and the older woman would need to be carried unconscious. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best they could manage under combat conditions. Rodriguez made his final tactical decision. Sullivan and Walsh secure the weapons. Kumar, maintain overwatch. Doc, you're responsible for keeping our passengers alive during extraction. We move in 30 seconds. As the team prepared for what would be a dangerous evacuation under enemy fire, Sarah looked at the 3 women who had gone from being potential threats to precious cargo. Morrison represented crucial intelligence and a fellow service member who had endured weeks of torture without breaking. The 2 Afghan interpreters represented America's promise to protect those who risked their lives helping coalition forces. The sound of the approaching extraction helicopter grew louder, competing with the gunfire from insurgents trying to prevent their escape. Sarah checked her medical supplies one final time and prepared for what she knew would be the most challenging evacuation of her career. Rodriguez looked at each member of his team, making sure they understood their roles and what was about to happen. Remember, these women trusted us enough to risk their lives helping our mission. We don't leave them behind. Not today, not ever. The next few minutes would test everything they had learned about combat medicine, tactical operations, and the bonds that held a military unit together under impossible circumstances. The extraction helicopter's rotor wash sent dust and debris swirling through the compound as Rodriguez's team prepared for the most dangerous part of their mission. Sarah had Morrison stabilized with 4 fluids and pressure bandages, but the lieutenant was still losing blood at a concerning rate. The young Afghan interpreter, who had told them her name was Fatima, was able to walk, but needed support. The older woman, Nasreen, remained unconscious and would require 2 men to carry her safely. Kumar's position at the window had become untenable as insurgent fire intensified. Bullets shattered the concrete around his hiding spot, forcing him to relocate to a more defensive position. His reports painted a grim picture. At least 20 armed fighters had surrounded the compound, with more arriving every minute. They're not just trying to stop us, Kumar reported through his radio. They're positioning for a full assault. This isn't random. They knew we were coming. Rodriguez processed this information with growing concern. If the enemy had advanced knowledge of their mission, it suggested a serious intelligence leak somewhere in the chain of command. But that was a problem for another day. Right now, his focus had to be on getting everyone out alive. Sarah was kneeling beside Morrison when the lieutenant grabbed her arm with unexpected strength. Despite her injuries and blood loss, Morrison's eyes were sharp with urgency. Sarah, Morrison whispered, using the medic's first name for the first time. There's something I have to tell you before we leave. Sarah leaned closer, still monitoring Morrison's vital signs while listening for any critical intelligence that might affect their extraction. The compound, it's not just a safe house, Morrison continued, her voice barely audible above the helicopter noise. It's a command center for coordinating attacks on American medical facilities. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Medical facilities were supposed to be protected under international law, but Insurgents have been increasingly targeting hospitals, clinics, and field aid stations. If Morrison had discovered intelligence about planned attacks on medical personnel, it could save countless American lives. Rodriguez overheard Morrison's words and immediately understood the implications. "Doc, we need everything she knows about those plans." Morrison struggled to sit up despite her injuries. "They have detailed layouts of the hospital in Bagram and the field surgical unit outside Kabul. They know shift changes, security protocols, everything." Fatima, the young interpreter, had been listening to their conversation. Despite her own injuries and trauma, she spoke up. "I translated some of those documents. They plan to attack during a mass casualty event when the hospitals will be overwhelmed and vulnerable." The strategic value of this intelligence was enormous, but it also meant they couldn't simply destroy the compound during their extraction. The documents Morrison and Fatima described needed to be recovered and analyzed to prevent the attacks they detailed. Sullivan had been gathering the stolen American weapons when he called out, "Rodriguez, you need to see this. There's enough equipment here to outfit a full insurgent cell, including night vision and encrypted radios." The cache represented a significant security breach, but it also provided an opportunity. If insurgents were planning to use American communication equipment for their attacks, coalition forces might be able to track their movements and intercept their plans. Walsh, who had been monitoring enemy radio chatter, reported a new development. "They're calling for mortar support. We've got incoming artillery in approximately 3 minutes." The situation had escalated beyond a simple extraction. They were now sitting in what was about to become the center of a major battle, with wounded prisoners who possessed critical intelligence that could save American lives. Rodriguez had to balance the immediate danger to his team against the strategic value of what they had discovered. Sarah made a medical assessment that would influence Rodriguez's tactical decision. Morrison can travel, but she needs blood products within the hour or she'll go into shock. Nasreen is critical. "I'm not sure she'll survive transport, but she'll definitely die if we leave her here." Fatima is stable but traumatized. The sound of mortar rounds launching in the distance reached their ears. Kumar calculated the trajectory and timing. "First rounds will impact in 2 minutes. They're walking them toward our position." Rodriguez faced a commander's nightmare. Too many variables, too little time, and lives hanging in the balance with every decision. The helicopter couldn't land in a combat zone without clearing the enemy fighters first, but waiting for air support would mean abandoning the intelligence that Morrison and Fatima had risked their lives to preserve. Morrison seemed to read Rodriguez's internal struggle. Despite her condition, her voice carried the authority of a veteran intelligence officer. "Sergeant, those documents are worth more than my life. Whatever it takes to get them back to command, do it." Fatima nodded weakly in agreement. "My village was destroyed because we helped Americans. Many people died. If stopping these attacks can prevent that from happening to other families, then we must try." Even Nasreen, in her semi-conscious state, mumbled something in Dari that Fatima translated. She says her husband was a translator who was killed by the Taliban. She wants his sacrifice to mean something. Sarah felt the weight of their collective determination. These women had already given everything to help American forces, and they were prepared to risk even more to complete what they had started. As a medic, her instinct was to prioritize their immediate safety. As a member of the team, she understood that some things were worth the risk. Rodriguez made his decision. "Sullivan and Walsh, grab every document you can carry. Kumar, mark the weapons cache for airstrike after we extract. Doc, prep everyone for movement under fire." The first mortar round impacted in the courtyard below, shaking the building and sending debris flying through the windows. Sarah threw herself over Morrison to protect the wounded lieutenant from falling concrete and glass. The explosion also startled Nasreen back to consciousness, and she began speaking rapidly in Dari. Fatima translated through her own pain. She says there are underground tunnels beneath the building. The Taliban used them to move between compounds without being detected. This information changed their extraction options significantly. If enemy fighters could access the building through hidden tunnels, their defensive position would become untenable within minutes. But the tunnels might also provide an alternative escape route if the helicopter extraction became impossible. Sullivan had gathered a substantial collection of documents and maps from various hiding places throughout the room. Many were in Arabic and Dari, but some contained English notations and American military symbols. The intelligence value was clearly significant, but the weight of the materials would slow their movement considerably. The second mortar round landed closer to their building, and the impact knocked several team members to their knees. Sarah's medical equipment scattered across the floor, and she scrambled to gather the most essential supplies while maintaining pressure on Morrison's wounds. Kumar spotted enemy fighters moving through the compound below. They're using the mortar barrage as cover for an assault. We've got climbers on the south wall and a breach team at the main entrance. Rodriguez's tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, but his team's training and experience kept them focused on their mission objectives. Every member of SEAL Team 7 had faced seemingly impossible odds before, and their bond as a unit had been forged through countless dangerous operations. Walsh had been monitoring their radio frequencies when he picked up an unexpected transmission. "Boss, we've got friendly forces inbound. A quick reaction force from Bugram heard our firefight, and they're moving to provide support." The news provided hope, but it also added complexity to their situation. Friendly forces arriving in the middle of a firefight created the risk of blue-on-blue incidents, especially if the QRF didn't know about the prisoners they were trying to evacuate. Sarah had Morrison sitting up against a wall, conscious and alert despite her blood loss. The lieutenant was dictating critical details about the intelligence she had gathered during her 3 weeks in captivity. The attack plans target 3 locations simultaneously, Morrison reported. They want to overwhelm emergency response capabilities and prevent medical support from reaching any of the sites. Fatima added her own knowledge. "I heard them discussing American medics specifically. They believe that killing medical personnel will break American morale and force a withdrawal." Sarah felt a cold anger building in her chest. As a Navy corpsman, she had dedicated her life to healing and saving others, regardless of their nationality or affiliation. The idea that insurgents were specifically targeting medical personnel represented a fundamental violation of everything she believed in. Rodriguez recognized the look in Sarah's eyes and understood what she was feeling. "Doc, we're going to stop these attacks from happening. But first, we need to get you and our passengers out of here alive." The third mortar round hit the building directly, blowing out most of the remaining windows and causing part of the ceiling to collapse. Sarah instinctively covered all 3 women with her own body, absorbing cuts from flying debris while ensuring their injuries weren't made worse by the explosion. When the dust settled, Kumar reported that enemy fighters had reached the second floor and were advancing toward their position. The sound of boots on concrete stairs meant they had perhaps 60 seconds before the room would be overrun. Rodriguez looked at his team, these warriors who had followed him through some of the most dangerous missions in modern warfare. Each face showed the same determination, the same unwillingness to abandon their mission or their principles, no matter what the cost might be. "On my signal, we move together," Rodriguez commanded. "Doc maintains medical support for our passengers. Sullivan and Walsh secure the intelligence materials. Kumar provides rear security. Nobody gets left behind." The sound of enemy fighters reaching their floor galvanized SEAL Team 7 into action. Rodriguez's hand signals coordinated their movement with the precision that only came from countless hours of training together. Sarah helped Morrison to her feet while Walsh and Sullivan gathered the critical intelligence documents. Kumar maintained his position at the doorway, his rifle ready to engage any threats that appeared. Fatima surprised everyone by standing without assistance and moving to help support Nasreen, who was drifting in and out of consciousness. Despite her own injuries and trauma, the young interpreter's determination to help her fellow prisoner showed the same courage that had made her risk her life working with American forces. The quick reaction force that Walsh had reported was making its presence known through the sound of heavy weapons fire outside the compound. American M240 machine guns and Mark 19 grenade launchers were engaging insurgent positions, but the QRF was still several minutes away from reaching their building. Morrison gripped Sarah's arm and whispered urgently, "The tunnel entrance behind the loose stones, near the west wall." Sarah helped Morrison move toward the area she had indicated while Rodriguez considered their options. Using underground tunnels meant entering unknown territory where enemy fighters might have prepared ambushes. But staying in their current position meant certain capture or death when the insurgents reached their room. Sullivan discovered the hidden entrance exactly where Morrison had indicated. Behind a seemingly solid wall, loose stones concealed a narrow opening that led into darkness. The tunnel was barely wide enough for one person at a time and would require them to move in single file, making them vulnerable to attack from either direction. Kumar heard enemy voices in the hallway outside their room. His translation of their Arabic was limited, but their intent was clear. They were preparing to breach the door and storm the room. Time had run out for deliberation. Rodriguez made the call. "Tunnel Sullivan leads. I'll take Morrison. Walsh carries Nasreen. Kumar and Doc bring up the rear with Fatima and the intel." Sarah gathered her essential medical supplies while helping Fatima prepare for what would be a difficult journey through confined spaces. The young interpreter was showing remarkable resilience, but Sarah could see that she was operating on adrenaline and determination rather than physical strength. The enemy fighters breached the door just as Kumar disappeared into the tunnel entrance. Gunfire erupted behind them as insurgents discovered their escape route, but the narrow opening prevented effective pursuit. The SEAL team had bought themselves precious minutes, but they were now moving into unknown territory with no clear idea where the tunnel led. Sullivan's voice echoed back from ahead. "Tunnel branches into 3 directions after about 50 meters. Need guidance on which way to go." Morrison, despite her wounds and exhaustion, provided navigation. "Left branch leads to another compound. Middle goes toward the river. Right connects to a network of tunnels throughout the district." Rodriguez chose the middle route toward the river, hoping it would bring them closer to extraction possibilities while moving away from areas where insurgents might have prepared defensive positions. The decision meant committing to a course of action with incomplete information, but that was a familiar situation for Special Operations Forces. Sarah found herself supporting both Morrison and Fatima as they moved through the cramped tunnel. The lieutenant was growing weaker from blood loss, while the interpreter was struggling with claustrophobia brought on by a recent trauma. Behind them, Kumar reported that enemy fighters were attempting to follow, but were being slowed by the tunnel's narrow dimensions. The underground passage was a reminder of Afghanistan's long history of warfare. Similar tunnels had been used to resist Soviet forces in the 1980s, and before that, to fight British colonial armies in the 19th century. The same geography that made Afghanistan so difficult to conquer also provided opportunities for those who knew how to use it. Walsh, carrying the unconscious Nasreen, was having the most difficult time navigating the tight spaces. The older woman's condition had deteriorated during their movement, and Sarah could hear her breathing becoming more labored and irregular. If they didn't reach medical facilities soon, they would lose her despite everything they had done to save her. Morrison continued providing intelligence even as her own strength faded. "These tunnels, they're how the Taliban moves heavy weapons into the city center. Coalition forces don't know about most of them." Fatima added her own knowledge. "I helped translate maps of these passages. They connect to government buildings, police stations, even the airport perimeter." The strategic implications were staggering. If insurgents had access to underground routes throughout Kabul, it explained how they had been able to carry out attacks in supposedly secure areas. The intelligence Morrison and Fatima possessed wasn't just about planned attacks on medical facilities. It was about a vulnerability that threatened the entire coalition mission. Sullivan's voice carried back through the tunnel. "I can see light ahead. Looks like we're approaching the exit." Rodriguez cautioned. "Slow approach. Unknown if the exit is secured or if enemy forces are waiting." As they neared the tunnel exit, Sarah could hear the sounds of the ongoing battle behind them. The QRF had reached the compound they had escaped from and was engaged in heavy fighting with insurgent forces. Radio chatter indicated that coalition forces had the upper hand, but the engagement was preventing immediate extraction support. The tunnel exit opened into a drainage culvert near the riverbank, concealed by vegetation and debris. Sullivan carefully reconnoitered the area before signaling that it was clear. One by one, the team emerged into daylight, carrying their wounded and precious intelligence cargo. Sarah immediately began reassessing her patients in the improved lighting. Morrison's condition had stabilized somewhat during their movement, but she still needed urgent medical attention. Nasreen was critical and required immediate evacuation to a surgical facility. Fatima was holding up better than expected, but was clearly operating on willpower alone. Rodriguez coordinated with the QRF commander to arrange extraction from their new position. The area near the river provided better landing zones for helicopters, but it also left them exposed to observation from multiple directions. They needed to move quickly before enemy forces could reposition to engage them. Walsh and Sullivan had secured the intelligence documents throughout their underground journey, but the materials needed to be properly cataloged and analyzed to prevent the attacks they described. Every minute they spent in the field was a minute that insurgents could use to modify their plans or accelerate their timeline. Kumar established a defensive perimeter while Rodriguez called in their extraction request. The coordinates of their new position were different from the original mission plan, which meant additional time for aircraft to locate and reach them. In a combat zone, those extra minutes could make the difference between successful extraction and disaster. Morrison surprised everyone by insisting on walking to the extraction point without assistance. Despite her injuries, the intelligence officer's training and determination carried her forward. She used her remaining strength to brief Rodriguez on additional details about insurgent plans and capabilities. Fatima helped support Nasreen, who had regained consciousness but remained severely injured. The older woman spoke to Fatima in whispered Dari, and the young interpreter translated. She says she's proud that her suffering will help prevent others from experiencing the same thing. Sarah checked her medical supplies and realized she had used most of her emergency medications and equipment during their extended operation. If they encountered any additional casualties before reaching extraction, her ability to provide advanced care would be severely limited. The realization reminded her of how many things had gone beyond normal mission parameters. The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air as coalition extraction aircraft finally reached their position. But the aircraft also drew attention from enemy forces, who began moving toward the riverbank to prevent successful evacuation. Kumar spotted at least a dozen insurgent fighters approaching from multiple directions. Rodriguez made a final tactical assessment. They had wounded personnel who needed immediate medical attention, critical intelligence that could save American lives, and enemy forces converging on their position. Everything they had trained for, everything they believed in, would be tested in the next few minutes. Sarah looked at Morrison, Fatima, and Nasreen, three women from different backgrounds and cultures who had risked everything to help American forces. Their courage and sacrifice represented the best of what international cooperation could achieve, even in the midst of war's brutality. The helicopter touched down 50 meters away, its crew chiefs already preparing to receive wounded personnel. Rodriguez gave the signal to move, and SEAL Team 7 began their final sprint to safety, carrying with them not just critical intelligence, but a renewed understanding of why their mission mattered. As they reached the aircraft and began loading their passengers, Sarah realized that this mission would change all of them. They had started the day hunting a high-value target, but they were ending it with a deeper appreciation for the complexity and humanity of the war they were fighting. Morrison grabbed Sarah's hand as they lifted off. "Thank you for seeing us as people, not just problems to be solved." Fatima smiled through her pain. "My family would be proud that their daughter helped American soldiers who helped her in return." Even Nasreen, despite her critical condition, managed to whisper something that Fatima translated. She says Americans kept their promise not to leave anyone behind. Rodriguez looked at his team as their helicopter climbed away from the battlefield. They had completed their mission, saved American lives, and demonstrated the values that made their sacrifice worthwhile. In a war often defined by its failures and frustrations, they had achieved something genuinely meaningful. Sarah began providing advanced medical care to her patients during the flight to the field hospital, using the helicopter's more sophisticated equipment to stabilize their conditions. But she also reflected on what the day had taught her about courage, sacrifice, and the bonds that could form between people from vastly different backgrounds who shared common values. The intelligence Morrison and Fatima had preserved would prevent attacks that could have killed dozens of American medical personnel. The tunnel network they had discovered would help coalition forces understand and counter insurgent movement throughout the region. Most importantly, they had demonstrated that American forces would risk everything to protect those who helped them, regardless of nationality or background. As the helicopter approached the medical facility where Sarah would hand over her patients to surgical teams, she realized that this mission represented everything she had hoped to achieve when she became a Navy corpsman. She had saved lives, prevented greater tragedies, and proven that healing and protecting others was worth any personal risk. Rodriguez looked at each member of his team and felt the pride that came from leading warriors who consistently exceeded every expectation. They had faced impossible odds and emerged with their honor intact and their mission accomplished. In the complex moral landscape of modern warfare, they had found a clear path forward guided by their commitment to their fellow service members and the innocent people caught in war's devastation.